It's Founders' Day at the Covington estate. This is the one day of the year the whole family must gather to present a united front of piety and grace honoring the man who built their dynasty. The air in the grand three-story antebellum mansion, though worn by time, is thick with the cloying scent of magnolia and old money, a fragrance both sacred and suffocating. I stand silently in a corner of the cavernous kitchen, arranging the last of the petite fours on a silver tray destined for the dining room. Through the serving window, I can see them all. The matriarch Eleanor Covington, my mother-in-law, sits at the head of the long mahogany table. Her expression is a mask of solemnity, but I can see the glint of smug satisfaction in her eyes. My sister-in-law Melissa, widowed and the recipient of the family's endless pity, moves with a practiced gentleness, pouring sweet tea for the elders. She looks so virtuous, so fragile. And then there's my husband David. He hovers awkwardly by his mother's chair, his eyes darting towards me again and again. It's a look I've come to know well, a cocktail of pleading guilt and an undeniable fear. He is afraid of me. Since yesterday, everyone in this house has begun to learn to be afraid of me. I meet his gaze, but my heart feels nothing, not a flicker of pity. Only a cold, vast emptiness. The memories unspool in reverse, like a slow-motion film, taking me back to a time when I naively believed that my sacrifice and patience would earn me a place in this family. 5 years ago, a girl from a small town in Ohio, I arrived at this estate with nothing but a heart full of love and the entirety of my life's savings. I had no prestigious family name, no hefty trust fund. All I brought were my sincere intentions and 2 hardworking hands. I believed that if I just treated them with genuine kindness and worked hard, they would one day accept me. David had promised me, holding my hand. "Anna," he'd said, "as long as I'm here, no one will ever treat you poorly." That promise, sweet as honey, vanished like sea foam. From the start, Eleanor made no secret of her contempt. She chided me for not knowing how to prepare a proper Southern 7-course meal, and criticized my simple, unadorned style of dress, claiming it embarrassed her son. She scoffed at the humble hand-stitched quilt my parents sent as a wedding gift. "That's just Mom," he'd say. "She's old-fashioned. For the sake of peace in this house, can you just bear with it for a little while?" So I bore it. I bore it when Melissa, my husband's widowed sister-in-law, moved in with us. The entire family treated her like a porcelain doll that needed to be protected. She had to do nothing but sit and grieve gracefully. If Melissa so much as sighed, Eleanor's glare would find me. "There is a person in deep mourning in this house. Can't you do anything without making a racket? The roast is ready. Why are you just standing there?" I kept my mouth shut when David and I were required to contribute half our monthly salaries to Eleanor to cover Melissa and her son's living expenses. I bore it when Melissa borrowed a new dress of mine and accidentally tore it. She just laughed awkwardly. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Anna. The fabric must have been too delicate. It's a shame, but it's not like you go out much anyway." My patience became an expectation. My husband's weakness was called filial piety. I lived in that house like a shadow, an unpaid housekeeper with no right to a voice, no right to grieve my own silent losses. Throughout those long years, my only comfort ironically came from my father-in-law, Arthur Covington. He was the only one in the house who treated me like a human being. A man of few words, he would quietly make me a cup of hot tea when he heard me coughing in the kitchen. When he saw me hanging laundry in the biting winter wind with chapped frozen hands, he would silently hand me a pair of insulated gloves. He never once defended me openly in front of his wife, but those small, silent acts of kindness were enough to thaw a small part of my frozen heart. I respected him with the pure affection one would have for a father. But I was a fool. I never imagined that this rare kindness would become the very pretext for them to weave their most vicious lie, a lie designed to push me into an abyss of humiliation and pain. I still remember that rainy afternoon 3 months ago. I was down with a terrible flu, my body burning with fever. After forcing myself to prepare dinner, I collapsed onto the living room sofa. Seeing this, my father-in-law brought over a tube of muscle rub. "Here, child, stay still," he said gently. "Let me rub your back and put some of this on. You'll feel better if you rest a bit." I tried to refuse, saying I was fine, but he insisted, so I lay on my stomach on the sofa. His worn, gentle hands began to carefully massage my aching back. The warmth of the ointment spread and the pain seemed to ebb. It was at that exact moment that Eleanor and Melissa returned from a shopping trip. The front door burst open and they froze in the doorway, their eyes fixed on the scene before them. I was lying on the sofa, my blouse had ridden up slightly to make the back massage easier, and my father-in-law was sitting right beside me. Without a word, Eleanor dropped her shopping bags to the floor. Her eyes blazed with a fire I had never seen before. Melissa, as if witnessing the most horrific act imaginable, clapped a hand over her mouth in theatrical shock. The air grew heavy. The only sounds were the rain dripping from the eaves and the frantic pounding of my own heart. I knew then. A storm was coming. A storm of suspicion and malice, and it would sweep everything away, including the lives of the children I had just discovered were growing inside me. In the bag at my feet, a small USB drive sat silently. It held the recording of their fate. It was my evidence, my weapon, and my final verdict against them. The low hum of conversation resumed as people began preparing for the Founders' Day toast. David glanced at me again. His eyes pleaded, please, but it was too late. I was no longer the naive Anna of the past. Today I would not yield a single inch. I knew that in a few moments when the first toast was made, it would not just be for the family's founder. It would be a eulogy for the honor of this house. But they didn't know. They didn't know that the real tragedy had already begun 3 months ago on a rainy afternoon with a lie more brutal than any blade. Eleanor's fiery glare and Melissa's hypocritical gasp of shock were seared into my memory, a scar that would never heal. Arthur, sensing the dangerously charged atmosphere, quickly stood up. He was clearly flustered but tried to explain calmly. Eleanor, Melissa, you're back. Anna's been running a high fever all day. She was in so much pain I was just rubbing her back. It's nothing. His explanation, far from calming the situation, was like pouring gasoline on a raging fire. Eleanor clenched her jaw and a voice as cold as steel slipped through her teeth. Rubbing her back, that's a fine way to put it. What kind of back rub requires you to lock the doors and pull a young woman's shirt up to her shoulders? Do you see a daughter-in-law, Arthur? Or some woman you picked up off the street? Someone you can just put your hands on? Her every word was not just suspicion. It was a blatant accusation, as if she had caught us in the middle of an affair. I scrambled to sit up, fumbling to fix my disheveled clothes. My face burned with a mixture of fever, intense shame, and a boiling sense of injustice. Mother, it's not like that. I had a high fever. I was barely conscious. Dad was just trying to help. Melissa, the sister-in-law, I had always tried to treat with kindness, wrapped an arm around Eleanor's shoulders, feigning comfort as she delivered a blow sharper than any knife. Anna, you should have been more careful. Dad's a man after all. I know he's your father-in-law, and he means no harm. He's so innocent. But other people might get the wrong idea. If rumors started, it would tarnish the whole Covington name. Think about it. At his age, if a nasty rumor got out, how could he show his face in town? Her words sounded like sincere advice, but each syllable hammered a nail into my coffin, painting a picture of me as a shameless, lewd seductress and my father-in-law as a lecherous old man. I was completely frozen. This was the same woman who just last week had been able to attend her friend's wedding because I had stayed up all night looking after her sick child. The same woman to whom I always gave the best portion of every meal. How could she say something so cunningly cruel to my face? Arthur trembled with rage. He slammed his hand on the antique coffee table, and the dull thud echoed through the room. Eleanor, Melissa, that's enough. There are no other people in this house. I think of Anna as my own daughter. She was sick, I was helping her. And you two have minds so twisted you can conjure up such filth. In the 5 years I'd been in that house, it was the first time I'd ever seen him raise his voice to his wife. His belated defense, though it couldn't change the situation, lit a faint warmth in my heart. But it was also the spark that ignited Eleanor's fury. She didn't stop. She screamed even louder, pounding her chest with her fists, as if she were the most betrayed woman in the world, tears welling in her eyes. My mind is twisted. I'm the one with filthy thoughts. Have I said a single thing that's untrue? And you still take her side? Have you even seen me as your wife since the day she set foot in this house? Or do you only have eyes for your sweet, innocent daughter-in-law now? She shrieked, glaring at me. Her eyes were a toxic mix of fury, jealousy, and a cruel, triumphant glint. Just then, the door opened again. It was David home from work. Before he could even slip off his polished loafers, Eleanor rushed to him, grabbing his arm like a drowning woman clutching a piece of driftwood. Pointing a trembling finger at my face, she began to sob, weaving a tapestry of lies. David, you're home. Come and see what your wife has been up to. She's even got your father wrapped around her finger. And when I said something, she dared to talk back to me. Your father took her side and called me a sick, dirty-minded woman. Look at this mess. What has happened to the dignity of this family? David froze. He looked from me, huddled on the sofa, to his father's enraged face. His eyes were filled with confusion and helplessness. I looked at him, my heart pleading. I wanted him more than anyone in the world to believe me. It's not true, honey. I had the flu and Dad was just rubbing my back. Your mom and Melissa misunderstood. But David wouldn't meet my eyes. He avoided my gaze and put a hand on his mother's shoulder. His voice was weary. Mom, please calm down. There must be some misunderstanding. I'm sure Dad was just worried about Anna. I thought his words would pacify her, but to Eleanor it sounded like her son was siding with her. It gave her wings. Misunderstanding. Is it a misunderstanding when they're behind locked doors with her clothes half off? Don't you dare take her side too. She has you completely fooled. Let me tell you something, a woman who doesn't know her place will always cause trouble. I will not accept a daughter-in-law like that in this house. She finished, spun around, and stormed into the master bedroom with Melissa slamming the door behind them. The sound was sharp and final, a clear severing of all ties. Arthur let out a deep, defeated sigh. He gave me an apologetic look, shook his head, and trudged to his own room. In an instant, only David and I were left in the vast living room. A terrible silence stretched between us. He still wouldn't look at me. He just bent down to untie his shoes and tossed a single light comment over his shoulder. It was colder than the rain falling outside. You should be more careful in the future. Mom's not entirely wrong, you know. Those words were a sledgehammer shattering the last fragment of hope in my heart. The man I loved with all my being, the man who had sworn to protect me, had chosen to believe his mother and doubt his wife, the woman carrying his children in her womb. I stood there as tears streamed down my face, not from the pain of the false accusation, but from the chilling realization that my heart was turning to ice. That night, I lay shivering with fever, curled up alone in our cold bedroom. I could clearly hear the whispers of my mother-in-law and Melissa from the next room. They weren't even trying to be quiet as if they wanted me to hear. Well, bless her heart. You can see her cheap roots, can't you? Pretending to be sick to seduce a man. I knew from the start she was no good. You're right, Mother. It's always the ones who act so sweet and innocent. It's all an act, a performance. The night felt eternal. I realized this was no longer a place I could call home. It had become an invisible prison where I would face daily scrutiny and vicious condemnation. And I knew this was only the beginning. The accusation was a seed of malice planted in the soil of suspicion. I didn't know then that it would soon sprout and blossom into a flower of death, a terrible flower that would take away everything I held most dear. They didn't stop at backbiting. They began to act tormenting me in ways far more cunning and cruel than I could have ever imagined. For the next few days, the air in the house was as heavy as lead. Eleanor and Melissa no longer spoke to me directly. They used silence and 1,000 small malicious acts to torture my spirit. At dinners, my favorite dish, a simple pot roast, was always placed at the far end of the table just out of my reach. The clothes I washed and hung meticulously on the line would invariably have a few pieces accidentally dropped in a mud puddle by the time I went to collect them. When I asked, Melissa would just offer a tight-lipped smile. Oh dear. The wind must have been strong. You can just wash them again. This psychological warfare was worse than any verbal abuse. It chipped away at my resilience and self-worth piece by piece. But what hurt the most, what drove me to despair, was the change in David. He grew distant and silent, his temper short for no reason. He no longer held me when he came home from work, no longer asked if I was tired or what I wanted to eat. Instead, there were only suspicious questions and a look of undisguised contempt. Did Dad make you that herbal tea again today? Why has he been buying breakfast only for you lately? Are you two hiding something from me and Mom? You seem a little too close these days. Each question was an invisible blade carving deeper wounds into my already bleeding heart. I tried to explain, to plead with him to believe me, to tell him that my relationship with his father was nothing more than that of a daughter and a father, that there was nothing shameful between us. But it was useless. The seeds of doubt planted by his mother and sister-in-law had taken deep root in his mind, transforming a loving husband into a warden who monitored his wife's every move. I felt a profound loneliness and helplessness in my own home. I couldn't bring myself to call my parents and worry them, and I had no close friends here to confide in. The injustice built up inside me, leaving me sleepless at night and unable to eat during the day. Within a few weeks, I was gaunt, my face hollowed out, and dark circles were permanently etched under my eyes. And then, in that dark and desperate time, a single ray of light pierced through my bleak existence. I found out I was pregnant. Holding the test stick with its 2 clear lines, I wept aloud, tears of joy, of overwhelming emotion, of hope. I believed that children, as it turned out, could be the miracle that would mend our fractured marriage, clear away all the misunderstandings, and bring the old David back to me. I wanted to surprise him. That evening, I prepared a feast of all his favorite foods. I put on a soft silk nightgown and waited, my heart pounding for him to come home and hear the wonderful news. But when he walked in, his face was like a sheet of ice. He didn't even glance at the lavish dinner I'd prepared. He threw a folded piece of paper at me. His voice was chillingly cold. Sign it. With trembling hands, I picked it up and slowly unfolded it. The words divorce agreement struck me like a bolt of lightning. My ears rang and the room swam before my eyes. Why? Why so suddenly? What did I do wrong? David sneered. It was a cruel, contemptuous smile I had never seen on his face before. Still playing innocent, do you think I'm some fool you can lead by the nose? Maybe this will refresh your memory. He tossed a stack of photographs onto the glass coffee table. They scattered in a chaotic mess. They were clandestine pictures of me and his father taken from sly, misleading angles. A photo of Arthur handing me a warm cup of tea. A photo of him gently patting my head when I, exhausted, had leaned my head on his shoulder. There was even a picture of him catching me when I slipped and almost fell in the yard. They were all simple moments of a father-in-law's concern for his daughter-in-law, but through a malicious lens, they had been twisted into evidence of an illicit affair. Under each photo, written in Melissa's neat, round handwriting, was a caption: "Inappropriate relations with father-in-law behind son's back. Secret rendezvous acting like a couple. Incontrovertible proof." Melissa. She took these, I stammered, my voice cracking. Who took them doesn't matter, David snarled, his eyes bloodshot. What matters is that it's the truth. You betrayed me. You betrayed this entire family. And you still have the nerve to stand here. I shook my head frantically, tears blurring my vision. No, David, please believe me. It was just Dad looking out for me. There's nothing between us, I swear. Nothing, David laughed, a crazed sound. Mom and Melissa saw everything. They said you seduced him first, took advantage of him because he's old and his judgment is clouded. You are a disgustingly devious woman. He lunged at me, grabbing my shoulders and shaking me violently. Tell me, whose baby is that in your belly? Is it mine or is it that old man's? Slap. The sound cracked through the air like thunder, and the imprint of 5 fingers bloomed on my cheek. My head spun, my cheek burning as if branded. I couldn't believe it. The man I had loved with all my heart, the father of the children in my womb, could utter such monstrous words and strike me without a moment's hesitation. I stared at him, my eyes filled with despair and disbelief. I pushed his hands away and stumbled back, trying to regain my composure. David, I'm pregnant. It's your baby, the doctor said. It's twins. I hoped this news, the double joy of becoming a father, would shock him back to his senses, make him realize the absurdity of his blind jealousy. But it didn't. It only seemed to drive him further into madness. Twins. Ha! A clever calculation. Trying to tie me down with them, cover up your sins. Not a chance. He screamed and shoved me hard. I lost my balance, stumbling backward. My back slammed into the sharp corner of the dining table. A searing, knife-like pain shot through my lower abdomen. I felt a warm liquid trickling down my legs, soaking my white nightgown. I looked down with a trembling hand. A pool of red was spreading on the floor. Blood! My babies! My babies! I panicked, crawling towards David, clutching at his pant leg. I begged him, my voice a desperate whisper. Help me! Save our babies, David! Please take me to the hospital. But he just stood there, cold and impassive, looking down at me as I writhed in agony. There was no pity in his eyes, no compassion. That's the price you pay for betrayal, he said, his voice like ice. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in a pool of my own blood, leaving me to scream the names of the children who had not yet seen the light of day. His footsteps grew fainter, mingling with the sound of the rain outside, cold and merciless. I knew. It wasn't just my children who died on that fateful night. It was my love, my trust, and every last ounce of warmth in my soul. In that moment of excruciating pain, I made a vow to myself. I would live. I had to live, and I would make every single person who had hurt me and my children pay the most terrible price imaginable. But to do that, I needed to find a secret. A terrible secret they had hidden for years. A secret uglier than the lies they had pinned on me. And that secret would be my weapon, the one that would destroy everything. The wail of an ambulance siren sliced through the night. I was on a stretcher, drifting in and out of consciousness. My mind flickered between the physical agony and a soul-crushing grief. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was the pale, terrified face of my father-in-law. Arthur was running alongside the ambulance, calling my name over and over. Anna, Anna. His old, wrinkled eyes were filled with helplessness and an unmistakable guilt. Perhaps in that cold house, he was the only one who felt any remorse, the only one with a shred of humanity left. When I opened my eyes again, the sterile antiseptic smell of the hospital filled my nostrils. The world was a cold, clinical white. The first person I saw was my mother slumped in a chair by my bed. Her once salt and pepper hair seemed to have turned completely gray overnight. When she saw I was awake, she grabbed my hand, her own rough, with a lifetime of work. Hot tears streamed down her weary face. "Anna, you're awake. Oh, honey, I thought I'd lost you." I tried to speak, but my throat was parched. I looked around. No David. No one from the Covington family. A chill seeped into my bones. I carefully raised a hand to my stomach. It was flat, terribly, unnervingly empty. I knew. I had truly lost them, my little ones whose faces I would never see. The babies. "Mom, what about my babies?" My voice was a hoarse whisper. My mother didn't answer. She just broke down into heavy sobs, her thin shoulders shaking. Just then, a middle-aged female doctor entered the room. Her eyes were kind and full of sympathy. She gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "Anna, I'm so very sorry. The trauma was too severe and you had lost a great deal of blood by the time you arrived. We did everything we could, but we couldn't save the babies. You're still young. You need to focus on getting your strength back." No matter how gently she spoke, her words were 1,000 knives all stabbing into my bleeding heart at once. But strangely, no tears came. Perhaps they had all run dry on that fateful night. All that remained inside me was a burning hatred, a fire of vengeance ready to consume everything. The days in the hospital were the darkest of my life. I didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't speak to anyone. I just lay in bed, staring at the white ceiling with empty eyes. My parents were sick with worry trying to comfort me, but their words were just noise. There was only one thought in my head: I want to die. I wanted to follow my poor babies to escape this painful, hypocritical world. David came to visit once. He hovered outside the door, unable to bring himself to enter. He looked gaunt and haggard with hollow eyes and a pale face. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. I turned my head away coldly. I couldn't bear to look at his cowardly, deceitful face. After lingering for a while, he left. Arthur was different. He came every day, rain or shine. He didn't say much. He would just quietly bring me warm soup and fruit, then sit by my bed, letting out the occasional deep sigh. His silent presence was strangely a small comfort. One afternoon, when we were alone, he gently took my frail hand in his. "Anna, it's all my fault. If I had just..." I cut him off. My voice was weak but surprisingly firm. "It's not your fault, Dad. The fault lies in people's hearts." "Dad, I don't want to live anymore. I have nothing left to live for. I just want to be with my children." Arthur gripped my hand tighter. Tears welled in his old eyes. "No. You can't think like that. You have to live. For yourself and for your babies. You have to live to see justice done. If you die, they'll be happy. They'll think they've won. Is that what you want?" His words were like an electric shock jolting me out of my despair. He was right. I couldn't die. If I died, who would avenge my children? Who would unmask those cruel, inhuman monsters? My death would only bring them joy. I had to live. I had to show them I wouldn't be broken so easily. I had to become stronger than ever before. After my discharge, I didn't return to that hellish house. I went back to my parents. I began to meticulously plan my revenge. I knew that to bring down a family as outwardly respectable and cunning as the Covingtons, I couldn't act rashly. I needed evidence, a sharp weapon that would socially annihilate them, ensuring they could never hold their heads up again. A fatal blow. I started to analyze everything. The photos Melissa had shown David were clearly staged. She had been spying on me and Arthur for a long time. Why? As a widow, completely dependent on her in-laws, why would she risk stirring up trouble and jeopardizing her own position, unless she had a compelling reason? A secret she was desperate to hide, a secret that my very presence threatened. I recalled her strange behaviors. She often locked herself in her room. Whenever David was away on a business trip, she would ask me if he had called, when exactly he was coming back. At the time, I thought it was just a sister-in-law's concern for her brother-in-law. But looking back, it was odd. The look in her eyes when she asked about David wasn't that of a sister. It was the look of a jealous, suspicious woman. A crazy, sickening thought crossed my mind. Could it be she was his sister-in-law, his dead brother's wife? How was that possible? But the more I thought about it, the more suspicious things seemed. Eleanor was always lamenting her widowed daughter-in-law's tragic fate, but she treated Melissa better than her own child. Melissa never had to lift a finger, and she never wanted for money. Eleanor had even hinted on several occasions that David would have to take care of Melissa and her son for the rest of their lives. What kind of care did she mean, or was it a shackle forged from some other kind of sin? I made my decision. I had to uncover the truth. I had to go back to that house. Not as a cast-off wife, but as a seeker of justice for myself. But how? They would never let me set foot on the property. Just as I hit a dead end, Arthur appeared once more. He handed me a small old set of keys. This is for the back gate and for my old study. I haven't used that room since I retired. No one ever goes in there. You might find something useful inside. His eyes held not only trust but also a great expectation. I knew this was the chance I had been given. A chance to turn the tables, to rip away the dark curtain of secrecy that had shrouded that house for years. But I didn't know then. I didn't know that what awaited me in that dusty old room was something far more horrific and disgusting than I could ever imagine. A truth that would make the heavens themselves weep with rage. The keys in my hand trembled with a mixture of excitement and tension. This was more than just metal. It was the key to the truth, the first weapon in my arsenal of revenge. I didn't rush. I waited patiently like a predator hiding in the shadows, waiting for its prey to show a moment of weakness. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A week later, I got a call from a kind former neighbor. She whispered a valuable piece of information over the phone. The entire family, Eleanor, David, Melissa, and her son, had left for a 3-day trip to the coast. They had gone to cleanse the bad luck and celebrate getting rid of me, the troublemaker. They thought I was completely broken, that I had resigned myself to my fate, and would never dare to bother them again. That was their fatal mistake. That night, dressed in black, a baseball cap pulled low over my face, I took a taxi back to that familiar street filled with bitter memories. The massive house was dark and silent. I held my breath, moving as silently as a cat towards the rusty iron back gate. I carefully inserted the key, and with a soft creak, the old gate swung open. I slipped into the yard, my heart pounding like a drum. Everything was the same. The old oak tree in the front yard still stood tall, and the swing David had built for me swayed gently in the night breeze. A pang of bittersweet memory hit me, but I quickly pushed the feeling aside. This was not the time for nostalgia. I was here to find the truth and reclaim my justice. I went straight to Arthur's old study, hidden behind a grove of overgrown magnolia trees at the edge of the garden. The room, long unused, smelled damp and musty. A thick layer of dust covered everything. I switched on the small flashlight I'd brought. The room was simple, a large ornate bookshelf, a heavy oak desk, and a rusty filing cabinet. I began my search. Honestly, I didn't know what I was looking for. I just had a gut feeling that the answer to all this tragedy was hidden somewhere in this room. I opened the desk drawers one by one, sifted through old notebooks, all were work documents or faded blueprints. I moved to the bookshelf, opening books at random but found nothing. After nearly an hour of fruitless searching, despair began to creep in. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Arthur had just given me the keys to comfort me and there were no secrets here at all. Just as I was about to give up, my flashlight beam happened to catch a dark corner behind the bookshelf. Hidden under a stack of yellowed newspapers was a small, dark red wooden box. Curious, I reached in and pulled it out. It wasn't locked. I held my breath and slowly opened the lid. Inside, there was no money or jewelry but an old leather-bound journal and an old model laptop. The journal's cover was worn at the edges, clearly very old. I opened it to the first page and saw Arthur's familiar yet somehow trembling handwriting. The 12th of October, 2018. Today was the first anniversary of Michael's death. Seeing Melissa and the boy so lost, my heart aches. My eldest son's sudden death has left such a burden on this family. My wife blames herself, saying she never knew about his congenital heart condition. But I know that's not the whole truth. The truth is far more terrible. My heart began to race. I flipped to the next entry with a shaking hand. The 5th of March, 2021. David is becoming more and more like his mother. Weak, indecisive, with no mind of his own. He lets Eleanor and Melissa manipulate him so easily. I fear one day he will repeat his brother's mistakes. I'm afraid the tragedy of this house will happen all over again. Repeat his mistakes. What tragedy? The more I read, the more confused and frightened I became. I flipped to the last entry, written shortly after my miscarriage. The 2nd of April 2023. Anna. That child is a good soul. She reminds me of someone who once saved my life. But she is too kind, too patient. She won't survive in this house, a place teeming with intrigue and sin. I must do something. But what can I do? I am just a coward who has lived in silence for decades. I closed the journal, my mind in a whirl. It revealed only a fragment of the truth, a vague but horrifying piece of the puzzle. It wasn't enough. I needed something more concrete. I turned my attention to the laptop. It was so old I wasn't sure it would even turn on. I found the power cord, plugged it in, and cautiously pressed the power button. Thankfully, the screen flickered to life. There was no password. The desktop had only a few icons, including a folder named Family Videos. After a moment's hesitation, I double-clicked it. Inside were numerous video files organized by date. I opened one at random. It was my nephew's birthday party, a normal family scene. I kept opening others. All of them were mundane home videos. I started to get anxious. Maybe Arthur had just stored old memories here. Then one video caught my eye. It was unusually large, and the file name wasn't a date, but a strange number: 1908. Curious, I double-clicked it. At first, the screen was black, then an image appeared. It was filmed from a hidden camera, probably placed on top of a bookshelf in the living room. The quality was poor, but I could make out everything. A date stamp in the corner showed it was from over a year ago. The living room was empty. A moment later, Melissa's bedroom door opened. She emerged wearing a thin, revealing silk slip and looked around as if searching for someone. A few seconds later, David came out of the bathroom with only a towel wrapped around his waist. Melissa smiled and walked towards him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "What took you so long?" David seemed hesitant. "Melissa, Mom's home." Melissa pressed a finger to his lips, shushing him. "She's asleep." "Didn't you miss me?" And with that, she pulled him into her room. The door closed slowly. The camera kept rolling, capturing every obscene sound that emanated from that room, the laughter, the moans, the sick whispers. My world fell apart. I sat frozen in front of the laptop, my limbs numb, my throat so dry I couldn't speak. This was the disgusting secret they had been so desperate to hide. An incestuous affair between my husband and his sister-in-law. Everything suddenly made sense. Why Melissa hated me, why she was so jealous, why she had orchestrated such an elaborate charade to destroy me. I was the obstacle. My existence, the children in my womb, everything was a threat to their sick, sinful relationship. They didn't just want to get rid of me. They wanted to annihilate me. Tears streamed down my face again. But this time they were not tears of sadness or weakness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. I gripped the mouse. I would never forgive them. I would copy this video, and on a very special day, I would expose their filthy truth to the world. The entire Covington family, everyone who had ever respected them, would see the true faces behind the masks. I would watch and see how they could possibly continue to live in this world after that. But before the final judgment day, there was one more thing I had to do. One last piece to put in place to ensure that when I delivered the final blow, there would be no escape, not a single shred of hope for them to cling to. Faced with that disgusting truth, I didn't crumble. Instead, a chilling calm took over me. The hatred was no longer a fire burning in my heart. It was an iceberg, frozen solid, waiting for the day it would melt and unleash a flood to sweep everything away. I carefully copied the video onto the small USB drive. From now on, it would be my talisman, a time bomb waiting to detonate at the perfect moment. I returned everything in the study to its original place, wiped away any trace of my presence, and slipped out of the house like a ghost. The pitch-black night enveloped me, but in my mind, a meticulous and ruthless plan for revenge was taking shape. I knew that a single video might not be enough to completely destroy a family as cunning and resourceful as the Covingtons. Eleanor was a master of manipulation. She could easily spin a narrative that I, in a fit of jealousy, had fabricated the evidence. I needed a more powerful weapon. I needed to rip off every layer of the virtuous moral mask they had spent years constructing. My first target was Melissa. I hired a trustworthy private investigator, an old college friend, and asked him to dig into her past, specifically the circumstances surrounding her husband Michael's death. I had a nagging suspicion that his death was not simply due to a congenital heart condition. How could a woman who constantly played the part of a fragile, grieving widow carry on such a brazen, pathological affair with her husband's brother? Something was wrong. Maybe she wasn't as grief-stricken as she appeared. Maybe Michael's death was the liberation she had been waiting for. I needed answers. While I waited for my friend's report, I began to sharpen my blade for David. I didn't file for divorce immediately. Instead, to everyone's shock and contempt, I moved back into the house. I played the part of a mentally broken wife with nowhere else to go, begging for forgiveness. Eleanor and Melissa looked at me with a mixture of scorn and triumph. They believed they had won, that they had completely tamed me. David showed a flicker of guilt and pity, but his chronic weakness prevented him from going against his mother and sister-in-law. He let me stay in a small, damp room in the back of the house and treated me like a servant. I accepted every humiliation without a word of complaint. I cleaned the house, cooked 3 meals a day, and did the entire family's laundry. I was silent and inconspicuous, and they gradually lowered their guard around me. But they didn't know that late at night when everyone was asleep, I became a different person. I would sneak into David's home office where he kept his laptop and important documents. I copied everything from his computer onto an external hard drive. David worked for a large construction company, and I knew he was not a clean employee. He frequently accepted kickbacks from subcontractors and embezzled funds by fudging materials costs. I had tried to warn him before, but he always brushed me off, saying, "Everyone does it. It's just the cost of doing business." Now, those very sins would become the sharpest weapon against him. I gathered enough evidence: dubious contracts, fraudulent invoices, and emails hinting at backroom deals. I saved everything meticulously. A month of endurance and humiliation passed. Finally, my PI friend came back with his findings, and the truth he uncovered was far more horrifying than I had imagined. Michael Covington did have a history of a congenital heart defect. However, the direct cause of his death was not a relapse but extreme emotional distress. On the night he died, neighbors testified to hearing a loud argument coming from his house. The person he was fighting with was none other than his brother David. What were they fighting about? The PI had tracked down Michael's best friend. According to him, just days before his death, Michael had confessed his suspicions about an inappropriate relationship between his wife Melissa and his brother David. He was in immense pain and fury, and was determined to find out the truth. And then he died. After that, everything was quickly swept under the rug. Melissa became the tragic young widow doted on by her in-laws. David became the devoted brother-in-law and model uncle caring for his grieving family. A perfect performance was staged to cover up a monstrous sin. I clutched the report, my body trembling with rage. They hadn't just committed adultery and incest. They had indirectly driven a man, a brother, a husband to his death. And then, with crocodile tears and hypocrisy, they had covered it up, living comfortable, prosperous lives built on the pain and death of another. Now I had everything I needed: the video of the affair, the proof of David's financial crimes, and the terrible truth about Michael's death. I had enough ammunition to completely annihilate this hypocritical, rotten family. But I wouldn't act immediately. Hasty revenge offers no satisfaction. I would wait. I would wait for the Covingtons' Founders' Day dinner, the day when all their relatives gathered from far and wide. The day they held most sacred, the day they wanted to show off their family's prestige and discipline to the world. That day would be the day I stripped them of all their virtuous masks. Everyone would see the ugly, filthy reality hidden behind their polished and respected facade. I would turn their most sacred celebration into a public trial, a tragic stage where they themselves were the main characters. They took my children. Now I would take what they held most dear, their honor. I knew that the pain of being stripped bare before the world, of being despised and abandoned by those closest to you, was a fate worse than death. But before the curtain rose on this tragedy, there was one more person I had to see. My final hidden card, the one who might determine the success of my entire plan for revenge. The person I had to see, my ace in the hole in this game of life and death, was none other than my father-in-law, Arthur Covington. He was the only one in that family with a conscience, the only one who had offered me a hand when I was at my most desperate. And most importantly, he was also a victim, deceived and betrayed by his own wife and son. I needed his help, not because I was weak, but because I wanted this revenge to be more than personal vengeance. I wanted it to be a judgment of justice and morality executed by the very elder of the house, the one with the most authority. I chose a quiet afternoon when Eleanor and Melissa were out shopping. When I knocked on his door, he was surprised to see me but welcomed me gently into his room. It was a simple space, a bed, a small desk, and a bookshelf filled with old books. He looked at me with eyes full of pity and sorrow. "Anna, how have you been? You look so thin." Instead of answering, I silently placed a thick file on his desk. "Dad, I need you to see this first." With a trembling hand, Arthur picked up the documents. It was the PI's detailed report on the suspicious circumstances of Michael's death. As he read, his face grew paler and his hand shook so violently he could barely hold the papers. When he reached the final line, the conclusion that David was indirectly responsible for his brother's death, he looked up at me. His old eyes were filled with horror, pain, and profound disappointment. Is this, is this true, child David? David did this? I nodded, my voice devoid of emotion. Yes. It's true. I didn't want to believe it either. They've been deceiving all of us and the dead for years. Arthur slumped over his desk, burying his face in his hands. His thin shoulders trembled. He was weeping the tears of a father utterly broken by his son's sins, the tears of a man who had been forced to witness too much tragedy and hypocrisy in his own home. God have mercy. What has this family done to deserve this? I waited until his sobs subsided. Then I placed the small USB drive on his desk. This contains irrefutable proof of their relationship. I have everything now, and I will not let them get away with it. On Founders Day, in front of all the relatives, I'm going to reveal everything. Arthur looked up. His gaze was no longer just pitiful. It was a look of awe mixed with compassion. You're really going to do it? What about the consequences? I have no other choice, Dad. They pushed me and my children off a cliff. For my sake, for my children who never got to see the world, and for Michael. I have to get justice. Arthur was silent for a long time, an intense internal conflict visible on his face. Finally, he let out a deep sigh, as if releasing a heavy burden he had carried for years. All right, I'll help you. I have been silent for too long. I stood by while evil flourished in this house and never raised my voice. I am also at fault. This time I will not be silent. I will reveal everything with you. I hadn't expected him to agree so quickly and so firmly. With his support, my plan felt more solid, more powerful. We began to discuss the details. He told me that on Founders Day, as the family elder, he traditionally had a moment to speak to all the descendants. That would be the perfect time to drop the bomb. He would set the stage, cast the first stone into the placid lake. Then I would deliver the final blow, unleashing a tsunami that would swallow all their hypocrisy and sin. In the following days, Arthur and I secretly prepared for our special trial. I showed him all the evidence I had, the video, David's financial documents, and even his own journal entries. With each piece of evidence, he would let out a heavy sigh. I never knew David had fallen this far. It's all my fault. I failed to teach him properly. It's not your fault, Dad, I comforted him. Their own greed and selfishness blinded them to reason and conscience. Finally, Founders Day arrived. I returned to the estate not as a submissive daughter-in-law, but as a judge and an executioner. I saw the hypocritical smiles of Eleanor, David, and Melissa, but my heart remained unmoved. They were merely playing their final roles before the curtain of truth rose. The formal dinner was laid out, and the thick scent of magnolias created a solemn, almost surreal atmosphere. Everyone bowed respectfully before the portrait of the family's founder. After a few traditional rituals, Arthur, as the eldest, stood up. His low, resonant voice captured everyone's attention. To our ancestors, and to all the descendants of the Covington family gathered here today, on this sacred Founders Day before the spirits of our forebears, I have something very important to say, a painful truth I have hidden for years, a story of a sin that has prevented this house from ever finding true peace. The entire house fell silent. All eyes were fixed on Arthur, a mixture of curiosity and unease in their gazes. Eleanor and Melissa looked visibly uncomfortable. David's face was ashen. He glanced at me before quickly looking down. I knew. The play had officially begun. The first act, directed by my father-in-law himself. What would he say? How brutally would he expose the sins of his wife and son? The entire house held its breath, no one knowing that his next words would be the signal for a terrible collapse, the beginning of a tragedy that would be forever etched in the history of this family. Arthur took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the ancestral portrait on the wall. His voice, though trembling, was strong, each word echoing through the grand dining hall. This painful truth is directly related to the death of my eldest son, Michael Covington. At the mention of Michael's name, Eleanor and Melissa jolted as if struck by lightning. Their faces were masks of shock and terror. Eleanor stammered, trying to interrupt her husband. Arthur, what are you talking about? Michael's passing was a long time ago. Today is Founders Day, a happy occasion with all our relatives here. Why bring up such a sad story? Arthur didn't even look at his wife. His gaze remained on the portrait as if making a confession before the dead. It was never in the past. For years, I haven't had a single peaceful night's sleep tormented by the guilt of not speaking the truth. Michael did not simply die of a heart condition. He died of heartbreak, of the shock of being betrayed by the people he loved most. He paused, then spun around, his eyes as sharp as daggers, and stared at David and Melissa, who were sitting side by side. Isn't that right, you two? The color drained from David's face. His legs trembled so violently it looked like he might collapse. Melissa quickly bowed her head, clutching the fabric of her dress until her knuckles turned white. Eleanor shot to her feet, her hands on her hips, screeching like a fishwife. "Are you insane? What nonsense are you spouting? Melissa is a poor widow and David is a good brother-in-law. What have they done to deserve such accusations?" "You be quiet," Arthur suddenly roared. The sheer force of his angry command stunned the entire room. "It is your blind protection that created this tragedy. Did you think I knew nothing? Did you think you could hide their disgusting sin forever?" The tension in the room was palpable. The relatives began to whisper amongst themselves, their faces a canvas of confusion. Arthur gave them no time to process. He pointed a trembling finger at David. "Do you remember the night your brother died? Do you remember what you said to him during your fight?" David stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead. I don't remember anything." "If you don't remember, I'll help you," Arthur snarled, his words hammering into David's chest. "You confessed to your brother that you were having an affair with his wife. You told him you loved her and wanted to be with her. That confession, that sick and twisted truth, is what sent your brother into cardiac arrest. You are the one who indirectly killed your own brother." "No, that's not true," Melissa suddenly cried out, lifting her head to put on one last performance as a pitiful victim. Michael died because of his illness. It had nothing to do with us. Dad, please don't frame us like this." "Frame you," Arthur let out a bitter, pained laugh. "Fine. If you insist on lying to the very end, then let the evidence speak for itself." He turned to me and nodded. "Anna, bring it out." All eyes in the room swung to me, the quiet daughter-in-law in the corner. I walked forward calmly, the old laptop in my hands. Eleanor, sensing doom, lunged at me like a cornered animal trying to snatch it away. "What do you think you're doing? You wretched girl. What scheme are you pulling now?" But Arthur was faster. He grabbed his wife's arms. "Stand still and watch," he growled. "Watch the true faces of your precious son and your virtuous daughter-in-law." I placed the laptop on a small table in front of the founder's portrait and plugged in the fateful USB drive. There was no need for a projector or a large screen. It was enough for the relatives in this room to see. I pressed play. The video began. The grainy footage from the hidden camera filled the small screen. The empty living room. Melissa in her thin silk slip. David with only a towel around his waist. Their conversation, their seductive gestures, everything was recorded in stark detail. The room fell deathly silent. The only sounds were the sharp intakes of breath and the sick, obscene noises coming from the laptop speakers. A moment later, a wave of whispers erupted, growing into a shocked roar. "My God, I can't believe it. This is incest. An abomination. The shame of it. What will people say? This is a disgrace to the Covington name." Eleanor stared at the screen, her face ashen. She staggered and would have collapsed if someone hadn't caught her. Melissa had already fainted, and David stood as if struck by lightning, his body trembling uncontrollably. He looked at me, his eyes no longer filled with anger or contempt, but with pure, abject terror. When the video ended, a horrifying silence descended. I stood up, my voice clear and firm, cutting through the stunned quiet. "This is the truth. This is the reason I was accused of having an affair with my father-in-law, the reason I was beaten until I miscarried and lost my children. It was because I was an obstacle to their filthy, sinful relationship." I turned to David, my gaze as cold as ice. "You asked me whose children were in my belly. Now let me ask you, do you deserve to be a father? Do you even deserve to be called a human being?" I didn't wait for his answer. I pulled out another stack of documents and threw them onto the table. "And this is the proof of all your bribery and embezzlement at your company. I tolerated it for your sake, but not anymore. All of this will be sent to your company's audit committee and the police tomorrow." The Covington family was thrown into another wave of shock. They had never dreamed that the daughter-in-law they had always belittled and despised held the power to destroy their entire legacy in a single night. The storm I had so carefully cultivated was just beginning to rage, and I knew this wasn't the end. There was one act left, one final performance to bring everything to a close. A final punishment that would make them suffer a fate worse than death, a price for every sin they had committed. The Founders' Day dinner descended into unprecedented chaos. The pious, solemn atmosphere vanished, replaced by a cacophony of screams, sobs, and curses. Even the normally composed elder relatives could no longer maintain their decorum. Eleanor, recovering from her initial shock, erupted like a volcano. But her rage was directed not at me, but at her precious son. She lunged at David, pounding his chest with her fists, wailing in despair. You worthless animal, you monster, what have you done? You've ruined this family, you've ruined everything. David didn't resist. He stood like a stone statue taking the blows, tears streaming down his face as he repeated the same meaningless words. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Melissa had been carried to a bedroom by some of the other women, but her desperate, heart-wrenching sobs could be heard through the door, a grim soundtrack to the unfolding drama. The relatives quickly split into two camps. One group surrounded the disgraced trio, whispering and staring with open contempt and disgust. The other group looked at me. Their expressions were complex, a mixture of pity for what I had endured and a new, undisguised awe. They could never have imagined that I, the seemingly weak woman, could bring down an entire dynasty overnight. Amidst this pandemonium, only Arthur and I remained strangely calm. He stood quietly by the founder's portrait, his old, weary face etched with deep lines of pain and helplessness. He said nothing, simply watching the tragedy of his own making unfold. I knew his heart was aching 1,000 times more than mine. It was the pain of a father forced to witness the corruption and sin of those he loved most. I walked to his side and gently placed a hand on his bony shoulder. Dad, it's going to be okay. Arthur looked at me, shaking his head. His voice was tired. No, child. It's not. This shame is something our family will have to carry forever. I'm just so sorry for putting you through all of this. I said nothing more. My work was done. The rest was for them to sort out, to face their sins, their consciences, and the judgment of the law. I turned to leave that suffocating house of hypocrisy and sin. Just then, David suddenly dropped to his knees. He crawled towards me like a beaten dog, grabbing my legs and begging. His voice choked with tears. Anna, please, I was wrong. I'm scum. I'm not even human. But please, just this once, forgive me. Don't send those papers. My life will be over. I'll go to prison. Please, for the time we had together. The time we had together, I laughed a cold, bitter sound. Our time together ended the night you beat me and killed our children, David. You don't need to apologize to me. Go apologize to our babies who never saw the light of day. Go apologize to the brother you indirectly murdered. I shook him off and walked resolutely towards the door. Eleanor scrambled after me, blocking my path. She too fell to her knees. It was a sight I never thought I would see. The proud, arrogant woman who thought of no one but herself was kneeling before me, pleading, Anna, I was wrong. Please, I'll give you anything you want. Hit me, curse me, I don't care, just please spare my David. He's the only son I have left. If something happens to him, I can't go on living. She wept tears of belated regret. But to me, it was all just a hypocritical, clumsy performance. She wasn't crying out of sympathy for me or remorse for her actions. She was crying out of fear. Fear of losing her precious son, fear of her family's complete collapse. I looked down at her with empty eyes. You're worried about him being your son now. When you and Melissa framed me, when he raised his hand to me, did you ever think of me as a human being? You didn't stop him. You just stood by and watched, enjoying my pain. It's too late for all of this, Mother. I stepped around her coldly and walked towards the door. Their cries and pleas followed me, but I never once looked back. The heavy wooden door of the estate slammed shut behind me. It was the sound of the darkest chapter of my life officially closing. Outside, the sky was clear and vast. I took a deep breath. The fresh air filled my lungs. I was at last completely free. In the days that followed, the Covington family was engulfed in the storm I had predicted. The scandalous rumors, incest responsibility for a brother's death, spread like wildfire through the town. The once respected Covington name became a laughingstock, a mark of shame. They didn't dare leave the house, for everywhere they went, they were met with looks of contempt and hushed whispers. Melissa disappeared without a trace. Some said she couldn't bear the shame and had gone back to her family in some remote town. Eleanor suffered a major health crisis and was bedridden. They said she had lost the ability to speak occasionally, muttering Michael's name in her delirium. David was immediately fired from his company, and with the evidence I provided, he was now under police investigation for embezzlement. He would not escape the law. The grand, imposing house, the stage for so many tragedies, was now as cold and desolate as a tomb. That was their punishment. A punishment more painful than prison, the complete and utter ruin of their honor, and a lifetime of guilt that would follow them to their graves. And the one man who had remained silent for so long, the one who had finally stood on the side of justice, my father-in-law, now had his own final choice to make. Between the unforgivable sins of his wife and son and the truth, what would he choose? After the storm, the Covington house stood desolate, a hollow shell of its former self. The collapse wasn't just external, fueled by public scorn. It rotted from within, a decay born of broken trust and severed family ties. People once bound by blood became strangers, even enemies. Arthur Covington, my father-in-law, bore the heaviest, longest-suffering burden. He had to face the brutal truth about his wife and son while shouldering the responsibility of cleaning up the wreckage as the family patriarch. A week after that fateful Founder's Day, he came to see me. He looked startlingly older, as if he had aged a decade in just a few days. His once dark hair was completely white, and his sunken eyes were filled with an inescapable weariness. He couldn't bring himself to step inside, standing on the porch and speaking in a raw, hoarse voice. "Anna, I came to apologize. As a father and as a husband, I failed. It is my fault that I let this tragedy happen to our family." Looking at him, I felt a deep sense of pity. This man, who had lived a life of quiet endurance, was forced to carry such a heavy cross in his old age. "Dad, it's not your fault. I never once blamed you." "It is my fault," he insisted, shaking his head, his voice bitter. "I was too weak. I let your mother-in-law run roughshod over everyone. I failed to protect you. I failed to protect David from his own mother's blind, suffocating love. And now nothing can be undone." He paused. "I've made a decision." "What decision?" I asked, a flicker of fear that he might do something drastic. "I'm selling the house, and I'm dividing the family assets into 3 parts. One part will be donated to a charity in Michael's name. One part will be for your mother-in-law and David. It is my last duty as a husband and father." "And the last part?" I was stunned. "Dad, I can't accept that. I don't need your money. This isn't money. It's my atonement to you. You've suffered so much. Take this and use it to start a new life. Please don't refuse. If you do, I will never be able to rest in peace." He looked at me with such desperation. I was torn. Refusing would only hurt him more, but accepting meant being tied to that family's money, a prospect I couldn't stomach. As I hesitated, my mother came out of the house. She had been standing by the door listening. She walked to my side, took my hand, and looked at Arthur. Her voice was calm but firm. "Mr. Covington, we are grateful for your kindness. But we cannot accept the money. Our Anna is young and strong. She can make her own way with her own 2 hands. Please use that money for your own retirement or for someone who needs it more." There was no blame in my mother's voice, only a deep understanding and grace that comes from weathering life's storms. Arthur looked from my mother to me, his old eyes glistening with tears. "Ma'am, I have wronged you both so terribly." "What's past is past, Mr. Covington," my mother said softly. "Holding on to resentment only hurts the living. We're all getting older. Shouldn't we try to live our remaining days in peace?" The conversation ended in a quiet, empathetic silence. Arthur didn't press us further. He bid my parents a respectful goodbye and turned to leave his stooped back, a lonely figure disappearing down the street. Watching him, I had a sudden realization: in this cruel war, there were no true victors. Me, David, Melissa, Eleanor, Arthur, we were all casualties, each carrying our own private burdens of pain and loss. A few months later, I heard that David had been convicted of embezzlement and bribery and sentenced to 3 years of jail time, suspended for 5 years of probation. It was a light sentence for his crimes, likely due to Arthur's exhaustive efforts. The Covington estate was sold, and Arthur and Eleanor moved into a small bungalow on the outskirts of town. I heard Eleanor's health declined rapidly, and her mind was often gone, sometimes not even recognizing her own son. For a woman who had committed so many sins, perhaps forgetting was a form of mercy. Arthur cared for his ailing wife with quiet devotion, living out his final years. My own life began to find its rhythm. I opened a small flower shop near my home. It wasn't a bustling business, but it brought me joy and peace. The grief of losing my children was still a tender spot in my heart, but I learned to live with it, to transform that sorrow into strength, to build a better, more meaningful life. I wanted my babies in heaven to be proud of their mother. One evening, a special customer came into my shop. It was David. His probation had just ended. He was thinner and tanner, but his eyes were no longer weak. They held a new calmness, a depth forged by time and hardship. He stood before me and silently placed a pot of white orchids on the counter. "Who are these for?" I asked, my voice as neutral as I could make it. David shook his head. "I bought them to apologize to you." He looked up and met my eyes directly, something he hadn't been able to do for years. "Anna, I know it's too late for anything I say to matter, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. I was a terrible husband, a terrible father, and a horrible human being. I don't expect you to forgive me. I hope you're doing well." I looked at him, and an unnameable feeling stirred within me. It wasn't hate, and it wasn't pity. It was just a strange sense of peace. I already have, I said. I've forgiven everyone, including myself. I hope you find your peace too. David nodded, his eyes turning red. Without another word, he turned and left. I watched his back disappear into the evening crowd. A soft breeze drifted in, carrying the faint, sweet scent of the orchids. The past finally was truly over. A new chapter of my life was beginning, but life always has a way of surprising you. I didn't know that in a corner of my future, another encounter was waiting for me, an encounter that would completely change the course of my destiny once again. My life flowed on as calm as a river after a flood. Anna's blooms became my sanctuary and my livelihood. Tending to the vibrant flowers and listening to the stories of my customers, I found peace in the simple, ordinary moments. I no longer dwelled on the past. Forgiveness wasn't for them. It was for me, for the tranquility of my own soul. 2 years passed. I was a different woman, stronger, more independent, and I had learned to love myself. I made new friends. We traveled, we volunteered. My life felt full and meaningful. One weekend during a volunteer trip to an orphanage in a remote mountain area, I ran into someone I never expected to see again, my former sister-in-law, Melissa. The glamorous, proud woman I knew was gone. She wore a simple, modest dress, her hair was cut short, and her face, free of makeup, held a strange serenity. She was working there as a volunteer caring for the children. We met by chance in the courtyard. We both froze the air, crackling with awkwardness. She broke the silence first. "Anna, it's you," I nodded quietly. "Melissa, what are you doing here?" She gave a faint smile, no longer a hypocritical smirk, but a genuine sad smile. "I came here to atone for my sins." She told me everything. After being cast out of the Covington family, she had wandered aimlessly, consumed by guilt. She had considered ending her life multiple times, but found salvation in the innocent smiles of the children at this orphanage. She had decided to spend the rest of her life here doing good deeds, caring for the children, and praying for forgiveness. "I know I don't deserve to be forgiven, Anna," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I committed terrible sins. I hurt you, and I indirectly caused Michael's death. I was a monster." I looked at her, and the last embers of hatred in my heart died out, replaced by a strange pity. "Everyone makes mistakes, Melissa. What matters is having the courage to turn back. You've already paid the price for your sins. Live the rest of your life well." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "Thank you, Anna. Thank you." We said nothing more. In that silence, I knew she was truly repentant, and I had truly forgiven her. The unexpected meeting made me reflect on forgiveness and on the strange detours of life. Some people fall and find the strength to walk towards the light, while others remain lost in the darkness of their own making. A few weeks later, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was familiar but hesitant. "Anna, it's me, David." My heart dropped. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's Mom. She passed away." His voice broke into a sob. I was speechless. Eleanor was gone. This morning, she went peacefully. "Before she passed, she made me promise to tell you. She said she was so sorry and asked for your forgiveness." I was silent, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. Sadness, pity, and even a small sense of relief. It felt as if all the old resentments had finally vanished with her passing. "I'll be there," I said. The funeral was a small, quiet affair. No bustling relatives, no close friends. Just a few neighbors, and the 3 of them, father and 2 sons. I lit a stick of incense before her portrait. The once beautiful, sharp woman was now just a faint image in a faded photograph. Life is so fleeting, I thought. All the hate, all the strife, it all returns to dust. Only love and forgiveness have a chance to endure. After the funeral, David spoke to me. "Anna, I'm leaving soon." "Where are you going?" "Far away. To start a new life. I can't stay here anymore. Too many painful memories, too many sins." I nodded. "Take care of yourself." "Thank you. You too. You have to be happy." We looked at each other one last time. No promises, no lingering attachments. And just like that, David left, choosing his own path to atone for his past. It seemed like everything was truly over. But life had another test for me, another truth to reveal, a secret that was tied directly to me and my lost children, a secret that stemmed not from the Covingtons but from my own mother's hidden past. Time continued to heal. My flower shop thrived. I was living in the present, looking towards the future, the past, a distant memory. Then one day, a well-dressed, elegant, middle-aged woman I didn't recognize came into my shop. She introduced herself as an old friend of my mother's and said she had something important to tell me, a secret my mother had hidden her whole life. She showed me a faded old photograph. In it, a young, beautiful version of my mother stood next to a man. That man was a young Arthur Covington. My world tilted on its axis. How? The woman sighed. Your mother and Arthur were in love once. They had loved each other deeply but were tragically forced apart by his family's disapproval. Arthur was then forced into an arranged marriage with Eleanor, and my heartbroken mother left town, eventually meeting my father years later. Then why tell me now? I asked, my voice trembling. It was your mother's last wish, she said, her eyes misting over. She asked me to tell you this, but only if you ever found yourself unhappy in your marriage. She didn't want you to live with resentment and misunderstanding. I was speechless. My mother had known all along. She knew I had married her first love's son, but she chose silence, not wanting to dredge up a painful past or influence my happiness. There's one more thing, the woman said, her voice dropping. It's about the children you lost. My heart seized. What about them? When you had the miscarriage, your mother suspected something wasn't right. So she secretly had a DNA sample taken from the twins and from David. She handed me a sealed envelope. With shaking hands, I tore it open. The results stated that David was not the biological father of the twins. It was impossible. Then who was? My mind raced, frantically searching for an answer. I remembered a company party around the time I conceived. A glass of wine that hit me too hard. A senior manager, Richard, who had offered to drive me home. Waking up the next morning in a strange hotel room. He had claimed he slept on the couch, that nothing had happened, and I had naively believed him. A few days later, he abruptly quit and cut off all contact. A horrifying suspicion washed over me. Could it be him? I tracked him down immediately. He was a successful executive at a real estate firm in San Diego. I flew there and confronted him, throwing the DNA report on his desk. He feigned confusion for a moment, then a contemptuous smirk spread across his face. I don't know what you're talking about. What does this have to do with me? What did you do to me in that hotel room? You drugged my drink, didn't you? He leaned back in his chair and laughed. Do you have any proof? It was 2 years ago. What can you possibly do? Why? Why would you do that to me? His laughter turned manic. Because you were with the man who took the woman I loved. I'm talking about Melissa. My world shattered again. He and Melissa had been lovers long ago, but her family had forced them apart. He had watched her marry Michael, then grow close to David, and his heart had twisted with a desire for revenge. He had used me as a tool. The rumors about me and my father-in-law. That was you and Melissa, wasn't it? He nodded casually. Of course. The plan was to get you out of the picture so Melissa could finally be with David. But you were tougher than I thought. You're animals, I screamed. You ruined my life, you took my children. I'll never forgive you. Sue me, he sneered. Who's going to believe you without proof? You'd be wise to keep quiet, Anna. You're no match for me. He was right. I had no proof. I was devastated. But I couldn't give up. I thought of Melissa. Perhaps she was a victim in his scheme too. If there was a shred of conscience left in her, she might help. I found her at a secluded Buddhist temple where she was living as a nun. When I told her everything, she wasn't surprised. She confessed the whole story. Richard had blackmailed her with a compromising video he'd taken after drugging her, forcing her to become his puppet in the plot against me. She even revealed that on the night Michael died, Richard had shown him the video triggering the fatal heart attack. He wasn't just a rapist and a fraud. He was a murderer. Is there any proof? I asked, a glimmer of hope. She shook her head, but then her eyes lit up. From an old wooden box, she retrieved an old cell phone. This was the phone Richard gave me to contact him. Maybe. My hands trembled as I took it. There was no password. And in the sent messages, I found it. The ultimate proof. A series of texts to a friend boasting about his perfect crime. He had documented his own evil. I clutched the phone. At last I had the weapon to bring him to justice. Melissa and I looked at each other. We would fight this together. With the undeniable evidence, Richard was arrested at the airport trying to flee the country. He confessed to everything and was sentenced to life in prison. After the trial, Melissa returned to the temple to live out her days in penance. I sold my flower shop and my house. With the money, I established a charitable foundation called the Phoenix Project, dedicated to helping women who have suffered from domestic abuse and betrayal. I found a new purpose, a new joy in this work. One day, a letter arrived from David. He was working as a laborer in rural Montana, building a new life. He had seen a news article about my foundation and expressed his shame and admiration. He enclosed a small donation, saying it was the only way he knew to begin to atone. I accepted it. Arthur called me sometimes to check in. He said he had found a quiet peace in caring for his wife. My life after so many storms had finally reached a calm harbor. I was not alone. I was surrounded by good friends, dedicated colleagues, and the countless women I had helped. We were a large family supporting one another. Sometimes at night, I dream of my children. They are no longer crying. They smile at me like angels. And I know from a peaceful place they are watching over me. I smile through my tears, tears of happiness and gratitude. Gratitude for a life that has allowed me to live, to love, and to grow through pain. My journey will continue planting seeds of hope and love, giving strength to all who believe in a new dawn. Life, I've learned, is always beautiful as long as you never lose courage.